Welcome to the Expert Network Team podcast,
where our goal is to inform and educate our listeners on matters related to finance, legal, insurance, accounting, and other interests that are of personal and business nature.
We hope you will find our content useful as well as entertaining. The Expert Network Team consists of Carl Frank of A&I Financial, Mike Miller of Miller and Associates CPAs, Jeff Cromendike of Security First Insurance Agency, and I'm Nathan Merrill. I'm an attorney at Goodspeed and Merrill.
Together, our independent team combines our expertise to provide you insights and solutions, some straightforward, some profound, for real-life opportunities we see on a daily basis. We hope you enjoy the information contained in today's podcast and find it useful. If you'd like to learn more or desire to meet with any of the Expert Network team members in person, you can contact us at info@expertnetworkteam.com. That's info@expertnetworkteam.com.
And we encourage you to take advantage of a free consultation with any of our team members. Just mention this podcast when you schedule your appointment.
Now on to today's podcast.
Hello, welcome to the Expert Network Team podcast. I'm Carl Frank, and with me I've got Nathan Merrill. Hi, Nate.
Hi there.
It is great to have you here, and we are excited for today's topic. You know, it's actually a depressing topic. I don't know how I get excited for a depressing topic, but we're going to talk about emotions, especially as it relates to the workplace. And we're going to have a two-part series here. Today, we're just going to cue it up, and we're going to talk about the causes of higher emotions and what's going on in the world. And we'll just share some anecdotal stories about what we've seen in our own with some of the people we work with and who care about, and why we're worried, and just get real about that, and maybe not offer a solution today, maybe a couple of solutions, but by the end of it, have a better feel for the lay of the office landscape in 2022.
Yeah, the one thing we certainly don't want to do or portray is that there's nothing to worry about, right? You can't walk out the front door if you're still doing that these days. You can't walk out the front door and look around you and say, there's nothing of concern here. There's nothing to concern me. There's nothing wrong. Obviously, we get fed through a lot of different channels daily, awareness of everything that is going on in the world around us. And I think part of what you and I have discussed as we talk about this first phase of the discussion is what is fueling our concerns or our anxieties. Not are they real or not, because that's kind of a separate issue. You know, do we really need to worry about X, Y, or Z event? It's how are we being fed these
scary news facts,
the events, the news cycle. How are we participating in that in a way, and is our consumption of it, is our focus on it healthy for our personal lives, our work environments, etc., etc.
And it's impossible to avoid. So even if we know it's not healthy, we're still subject to it, right? We're still exposed to it. We're still not. That was interesting. We'll get rid of that.
That's live part. TV for you folks.
If you've got an opportunity to avoid news, let me know, because the rest of us can't do it. Oh my goodness. It's impossible to do. Like you said, I mean, maybe you could walk out the door today. I mean, the weather's just gorgeous, right? We've got a little bit of snow. We've got blue skies. It's just incredible. And there's no reason in the world why my personal health is being threatened, right? But I still feel this anxiety, and our employees are too. And we're all exposed in a high-tech world to news that's terrifying all the time.
Well, let me throw this out here as a baseline here, because we talked a little bit about this before going live on the recording. Using as a baseline, you say I would agree. It's hard, if not nearly impossible, to live in a bubble. To live in a bubble where you don't have any exposure to current events. But I've actually done this myself for a period of time where I did some ecumenical service for my church, where we didn't consume media. We didn't have newspapers. We didn't watch TV. And the period of time that I did my service wasn't without events. But not having awareness of those events didn't change that they were happening, obviously, but they didn't impact me, at least in my little enclave up in New England. So at
Right.
some level, if you choose to extract yourself from the media channels, and we'll talk a little bit about this, I think, today, at what level do you engage in those channels of information? But to the extent you voluntarily extract yourself from them, all you really have to be careful about there is making sure you do have access to information that does impact you, obviously local weather, those sorts of things. But at a separate level, I think this is your point. As we engage in the world, we start to consume higher and higher levels of information. Our information consumption increases as we get more and more engaged, and that can be through watching everything from watching the local news, maybe a talk radio on the commute in. Hopefully you're listening to this podcast. You might have your social media feed. I don't know what Twitter is, but apparently a lot of people participate in that. You got your Facebook feed, innumerable websites, subscription sites, your Fox News, your MSNBC, your CNN. I mean, when you think about how much time we spend consuming media in a day, most people have iPhones, right? And it tells you how many hours a day you're on the iPhone. For me lately, it's been way too much because there's just a lot going on, and I am a
It's
high
so scary.
consumer. I am a high consumer of media. But first is, I think, a self-assessment, wouldn't you say, of like, am I consuming the right amount of media and information? And we'll talk a little bit. I think we want to talk a little bit about what constitutes the right kind of information. And volume wise, is it sufficient? Is it excessive? How is that impacting my emotional state?
You're exactly right that we are inundated by it everywhere. And if we're not careful, we can become addicted to it. We just are exposed to it so much, and it's hard to turn off. And right now, as we're talking, the war in Ukraine is raging, and there is always going to be a dramatic moment. Every single second, it seems like we need to plug back into some sort of a news source that's going to give us some sort of a change in what's happening in our world right now. And it feels so dramatic. It feels like we'll be safer if we know what's going on. And like you said earlier, when you go on a retreat, when you get out, maybe you're actually a little bit safer. Maybe there's some things you can do there. And I love this idea of a self-assessment. But then I've got questions, and just a lot of them, which is, how do I know what is the right amount? What might be the right
Well,
amount for me might be much less than for you.
right. Well, I think that's why I said it's an honest self-assessment. You have to figure out how much media consumption is driving your emotional state. But let me again use a different baseline, versus juxtaposed to that zero media consumption baseline that I offered up earlier. When you compare the type of media we get, and I'm with you, like I'll check my phone several times during the day to see if there's an update. Sometimes you'll check it 15 minutes apart to say, hey, has this story been updated, right? You're almost like a click junkie at that point. And I admittedly am, but I also have a very high tolerance. I don't get anxious. I just get obsessive. So my issue is a little different than perhaps the anxiety driven behavior. I have just a real appetite to know what's going on. But when you juxtapose that and what we're dealing with Ukraine right now, and you compare that with how quickly information flowed during World War II, I mean, you actually had to go to the movie theater to
To
watch
find
the
out.
talkies to find out what was
Exactly.
going on with the war. And that was
It's so fast.
exponentially more significant in terms of how it impacted people than what we're dealing with today. And it's
Exactly.
truly our ready access to information, the 24 hour, we've talked, you hear a lot about the 24-hour news cycle and its origins in the late 90s with cable news and all that stuff, but there's a lot to it. Then you add social media on top of that as a
And
whole different information source, and it's 24/7 times 10.
or worse. And there's so much out there that's just not helpful. And probably not accurate. And you have to be so careful about what you pursue and what you believe. And we're passionate people. We're patriot Americans. We just really want things to work in the right way. And the listeners of this podcast, a lot of them are of us are business owners, and so we've got people in our office who also have passions and emotions, and so now we've got to manage not just ourselves, but we got to manage them. And one of the things that I'm thinking to myself as I listen to you, Nate, is that I've got to get in touch with myself before I can help them. I've got to get myself grounded and have a healthy relationship with this news that I'm consuming before I can help them. And with a big change like what's going on in Ukraine, and the possible ramifications of how big this could be, it's hard really to put it into perspective. And so I want to consume even more media, which I know makes me even less available for other people emotionally and time wise. And it is a tough balancing act.
Well, and this gets to it. It is a balancing act at some level, but at some level, it's a sifting exercise as well, I think, because not all media is the same or of the same value. And so it's a question of figuring out between good, better, and best, and throwing out the crap altogether. So you don't consume sensational stuff. That's just got to go regardless. And then you find within your channels of information gathering the good, better, and best. And I would like to posit a theory that anything that is probably within a day to a week in terms of time frame is in maybe the good category. Good to know what's going on. The better stuff is the broader understanding of, let's just use Ukraine as an example. Like, what is the story behind Ukraine? Where did it come from? Understand the history of what's going on, kind of maybe a modern history. So where are you going to go for that? Well, you go to magazine articles that are more enduring in their relevance and their information. And then when you think of best, you think of true history. You think of understanding, if you really want to understand what's going on with Putin, you've got to read what you can about communism and Stalinism and Leninism and all that sort of stuff. May not seem very exciting, but I'll tell you, it's the best information that will give you a foundation, a base to work off of, to developing your own attitudes about what you're seeing going on versus being fed your attitudes. Because that's what the modern media will do, is it will tell you what to think. It will tell you how to interpret the inputs. It will tell you what the stimuli mean. And if you really want to develop a solid grounding, you have to be able to come up with those assessments on your own, but you can't do that in a vacuum. You have to actually acquire the information.
I think you're really onto something there. So modern media, right, is good. I mean, it's good. It's going to be giving you an opinion. And if it's something that's not of extreme importance to you, they'll tell you what to think, and you might disagree, and you can let it go. And that's
tomorrow they'll tell you to think something different too. That's the
well,
big problem with the media, is it shifts because the facts change so quickly. That's what I'm saying. You have to go where your facts are more stable.
I love it, and I hear you, and I think that's that's amazing that we can get the news the way we get it, and that the facts, that some of them are just not reliable, period, and we can discard the ones that are sensationalism and unreliable, and then we can get this media in a source and realize that so much of it, and what's selling today and what's getting more popular, are the commentators who have their opinions. It's not just the facts, it's the opinions around it. And that's what people are interested in. And maybe it's because we're lazy. If I were cynical, I would say we're lazy. We don't want to do our own thinking. But if I were just quite frankly being honest with you, we don't want to have to think about everything. We do sometimes need somebody to tell us what to think about something that's not of critical importance to us. And then we just set it aside and leave it alone. And that's really convenient for us. But even better, I love that idea about magazine articles and books, perhaps. And then the best, from my point of view, might be slightly different. I don't know, but from my point of view, it's the long-term history, right? It's the long-term perspective of Ukraine. In that place, it's geography for me that helps me understand what's going on. As of today, the Russian forces are conquering the coastlines, which will stranglehold this landlocked nation, if they did nothing other than hold that, Ukraine would be much more poor, right? Much less wealthy than they even are today. And that makes sense to me. And I visited that area of the world when I was a long time ago, and it was the Soviet Union. And I am amazed by that part of the country, because it is literally like Kansas runs into Florida in 500 miles. Like, it is just an amazing geography that's been conquered so many times, so easily, by so many people over centuries, if not millennia. I don't know my pre-medieval history, but certainly since 1200 to now, from the Cossacks to the Tatars to the Russians to the, it goes on to the Poles. I mean, goodness gracious. And then, of course, the Mongolians. I mean, everybody conquered that area because it's really easy to run over. There's not a whole lot of geography that's going to block you. So it's an ongoing history with these people, and it's the Wild East. It's Europe's Wild East.
Well, not that I think that this book is gospel truth necessarily. You've, I think, heard me refer to it recently, and it just happened to be timely that it was referred to me and I read it. But two interesting books that I've read recently that I think at least give some perspective. If someone was wanting to consume some modern textual analysis on this whole issue of world superpowers and power plays and all this stuff, there's two books written by the author kind of in succession. One is called The Accidental Superpower, and the follow-on is called The Absent Superpower. Mm-hmm. And what's interesting to me is I read that, and I actually almost finished one of the books coming back from a trip last week on the road, and this was only 6-7 years ago, 7 to 10 years ago that he wrote these books.
Yes, Accidental Superpower. Yep.
He more or less in those books gave the premise and predicted that these events would have to happen. Like he's saying from a statistical analysis standpoint, he gave all his reasoning between energy and demographics and culture and geography, which was one of the most illuminating things for me, was just understanding the geography in terms of navigable rivers, ports, all that stuff, and how much that plays into these power, assertions by various quote unquote superpowers. It gives you some perspective as to the why. And I think that's one of those things, as we understand more about the why this is happening, we'll understand the broader impact of it. Because I don't know that, Putin in this instance is a tyrant and an imperial, dictator.
Yes.
But is he trying to conquer America? I don't think that's even remotely within his realm of.
No, I don't think so.
Even his delusional grandeur, right?
Yeah, seriously. That's a great reference. And we'll put that in the liner notes to get that book. I agree. It's a classic in my mind as well. And he does some great work on how America, the accidental part, of course, is about America, and why some of the strategic advantages of our favorite country in the world.
And I just want to bring a light moment in here for a second, because something you said earlier made me think of it. For those who are fans of the movie Princess Bride, like I am, if you're familiar with how the movie goes, the grandfather comes in, the grandson is sick, and the grandfather comes in and he's going to read him the story of the Princess Bride. And the kid's like all put out, like, a book. He's like, that's right. When I was your age, TV was called books. And I think we need to perhaps at this stage of life, and again, recognizing how inundated we are with media, re-embrace that statement of Grandpa and the Princess Bride, which is to say TV when I was a kid was called books, and we need to re-embrace reading again and book learning. And going back to what you said earlier about balance, it's as much about balance as it is prioritization. If we could give up 2 hours of social media a day to do an Audible or pick up a book and read something that's substantive and tried and true and vetted and has stood the test of time, we'll be much better for it, even if we don't know the latest update on. I'm going to really date myself. My first thing I was going to say was J-Lo, and then I'm like, well, it's now Kylie. I don't even know who the latest thing we get updated on is.
But, I don't know.
We all remember the J-Lo days, right?
Absolutely. Not that long ago, she was at the Super Bowl with a new boyfriend. I'm sure our listeners remember his name. I forgot already. Can't remember. But anyway, I think, we digress. I think that the big thing is that, we as business owners, we need to model the way, right? We can't
Yes.
just preach and say, hey, stop your social media or do this or do that.
And then rapidly consume it ourselves and say, hey, did you see? Hey, did you see?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So as you know, we run an investment advisory firm, and we help people to retired, and they, quite frankly, have a lot more time to consume media than we do. And they'll come in with more knowledge about certain things than we have, or apparent knowledge, depending on their news sources, right? And we are providing them perspective, but it's also happening within our office. I know with last week, as we were talking to clients, we were all consuming social media ourselves, and walking around the office, people are looking at their iPhones or their smartphones and their computers, and it's not business related, but it's exactly business related. It is the business of being a human being in the world's leading economy, and being a socially responsible human being and caring about what's going on in the world, and then also somehow finding perspective, somehow saying, okay, so in the past, when Russia invaded Crimea, or in the past when Russia invaded Georgia, right? This is what happened to our retirement portfolios in America, or any other war event anywhere around the world. Finding some sort of a way to say, this is what is important, and this is what will last. And quite frankly, a lot of what we consume on a daily basis does not last. I think that it's almost like the explosions we're watching in Kiev. That social media is momentary, but the rubbles, the damage that it creates, can last a very long time.
Absolutely. And you talk about gaining perspective, and one of the things that I thought about before is you were talking about how they just are taking the coastline, trying to really isolate Ukraine from its resources. Again, not without precedent. We had the whole Berlin airlift situation because Russia has tried it in the past, right? I mean, this is anybody who plays Risk knows kind of, or Axis
Ukraine
and allies.
territory.
Yeah, you understand how this all works. And there's
Right.
another fun clip if you want to throw it into the podcast. Again, these are somewhat comical things, but there's a fun clip called it's I forget the name of the comedians, but they do like sketch comedy, and it's countries playing Risk. I'll make sure Carl gets the link. And it's the various countries as players playing a game of Risk, and you have Russia in this clip where Ireland is the one kind of managing the game, and he looks over at the Russian character whose name is Dmitry, and he says, "Dmitry, are those your troops in Ukraine?" And Dmitry responds, "What troops? I don't see any troops." And this was years ago. Again, this wasn't like a modern sketch comedy thing. So obviously this thing has been present for a long time, but
oh my goodness, it's so true. It's so true. Well, we're going to try to get an expert on Ukraine history here on the podcast, or in a Zoominar here, in the next few months, if we can find one, and help us put perspective on it. Because, I visited there one summer. I have a lot of heart there. I have a lot of feelings for those people, and know they're super tough and amazing. But I got to tell you, you really do have to get somebody who's an expert at it to give you the true perspective on what this means. It's been so many years of heartache, like you said. It was not just Putin that wanted to conquer Ukraine, right? This is decades and decades and generations of culture clash going on in that part of the world.
And what appears to have been one of the major miscalculations, and I think there's a big learning lesson for us as Americans in this, is that Putin purportedly believed that the Ukrainians would embrace Russia as the mother country, that they viewed themselves effectively as disembodied Russians. And that has certainly proven not to be the case, that these people have a true national identity. And the learning lesson, maybe this will be my closing thought for us, is how to do this. This is what I think plagues us as Americans, is do we have a national identity? If it came to it, would we band together as D's and R's and whatever you are to say, this is America? And my concern is that we have it so good here. I was mentioning this to someone the other day, that the only things we can seem to find of significant importance are whether or not we let men into women's bathrooms or not. I mean, these are the things we're fighting about, and we've lost our common identity as to what it means to be an American. And though, while I hope that it doesn't take a national tragedy to help us find that, that's what Ukraine is finding. They're finding a common Ukrainian identity. They're fighting for Ukraine.
That is a deep, deep thought and a great thing to think about. And I'm very optimistic that we would unite. But I got to tell you, right, like you said, in perspective, what's going on in Ukraine is so vastly more important and threatening than a lot of what we've been fighting about, like in
masks
America
and
for
mandates and schools
years.
open or schools closed. Yeah, I mean, all those things are impactful, but
not like this.
It's not like what they're dealing with,
and
they're going to be stronger for it if they survive.
Yeah, and this type of threat, this is an opportunity for all of us, especially as we're talking to our employees and helping our clients and helping our vendors and everybody that we interact with, all of our supply chain and our networks as business owners here, is to help have that little bit of a grounded confidence. I think optimism is the ultimate realism that's giving a preview for where I think we'll go on our next podcast. We'll have Jeff, who is admittedly our maybe the strongest of the four of us, if you don't mind me saying that, Nate, at that topic and this topic of culture building. And Nate, Jeff is the best, man. And so he's going to be a lot of fun to have on our next podcast. And I think that's my closing thoughts. I really look forward to talking with you again real soon.
It's been a great conversation. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Nate. Have a great, beautiful day.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. Hope you enjoyed the information we shared.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please feel free to share it with someone else. And join us next time.
If you want to meet with a member of the team, please contact us at info@expertnetworkteam.com. That's info@expertnetworkteam.com.
If you have special topics you'd like to hear about, please reach out to us and let us know at the same email address. Again, that's info@expertnetworkteam.com. Thank you for joining us and have a great day. Thank you for listening to this podcast. We want to remind you that listening to this podcast does not establish a client-professional relationship with any of the firms represented, nor does it constitute legal, investment, or accounting advice, and the views are those of the professionals only.
Investment advisory services may be provided through A&I Financial Services, and securities may be provided through Genios Wealth Management.